Hey, Andre, did you know that the National Park Service is issuing warning letters to people taking all-wheel drive cars on four-wheel drive trails? What we're talking about is a user who recently went to Moab, Utah, and did the Colorado Overlook Trail and got a warning letter that he posted on the Substack on Reddit that basically said, knock it off. What did the letter say?
Yeah, and this has to do with Utah, right? And the fines could be huge, and the penalties could be huge as well. So let me show the letter here and show you what it says. As stated in this particular statement, high clearance four-wheel drive is required on motor vehicles traveling on the following roads, and it includes Colorado Overlook Road. And it basically states that the park ranger saw this vehicle, which was an orange Subaru Crosstrek, on this such and such date at such and such time. So it's very precise, and the penalty could be up to $5,000 or up to 6 months of imprisonment.
Or seizure of collateral, which I suspect means the car in this case. Now, what we're talking about are people who are taking all-wheel drive cars on trails designed for four-wheel drive vehicles. So I think in this video, let's define the difference between all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive. And at the end, let's talk about electric vehicles, which completely muddy the water. But I spent a lot of time, in Moab and asking journalists, what's the difference between all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive? And most journalists I talked to said the difference is having a vehicle with a low range. And I think that's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, low range basically gives you gearing to be able to move slowly, right? And when you move slowly, there's less opportunity for damage because you can kind of judge the terrain and crawl over obstacles. But many manufacturers, not just Subaru, right, have all-wheel drive crossovers, little SUVs or big SUVs that are kind of meant, to go a little bit further off the beaten path, right?
Yeah, so what we're talking about is a difference between soft roaders and hard rotors, I guess. And the fact is, if you have a low-speed transfer case, chances are it's either a pickup truck or it's some vehicle that has been dedicated or designed specifically to go off-road. So now we're talking about things like the Jeep Grand Cherokee, the Land Rover Defender, the GX, the new GX that we've got sitting in front of our office.
A Wrangler, a Bronco.
Yeah, these are cars and trucks that have also high clearances, and that's something that I think a lot of people want. Now, the trail that they went on, what does Onyx say? How hard is that trail?
So Onyx Off-Road, which we use all the time to judge and plan our trips, it rates this trail at 4 out of 10.
So not too hard.
No, that means the Subaru may have made it, based on that rating. I haven't personally run that trail. I don't know
either. Yeah.
I don't know if you have, but the issue, I think, let's talk about the spirit of the law.
Yeah, I think what the Park District is worried about is people getting stuck and endangering themselves and perhaps others because the car or truck is not capable of making it across the entire length of the trail. So what you could do is you could get yourself stuck, and then you can create a bottleneck where other people get stuck. And I think they're worried about driver safety more than they are about the trail or about other potential factors.
And potentially resources to get that person back out, right?
Sure, it's
because it's really expensive to bring an off-road based tow truck or some other way to pull it out.
Now, the line recently between, let's call it a high clearance four-wheel drive vehicle and a high clearance, because it could be a high clearance all-wheel drive vehicle, has been blurred. But the other difference is, of course, and this is an important difference, is a lot of the four-wheel drive vehicles, not all of them, have more all-terrain like tires. Mm-hmm. So this Subaru that we're looking, this Mazda that you've got here, that's the new Meridian edition, which
has a little bit more aggressive tire.
It does have more aggressive tire, and it's part of this trend where manufacturers are creating, let's call them more lifestyle vehicles. So usually that means, blacked out wheels, more aggressive tires,
roof racks,
cladding.
Yes.
But the mechanics of the vehicle underneath necessarily aren't any better off-road. Now, it depends. This is a very fine line because, for instance, Honda has created with their Trail Sport. Yeah, their Trail Sport Passport, a much more off-roady vehicle. It doesn't have a low range, but for instance, they put a recovery hook under the front of it, which is something.
And skid plates.
Which is something that is very important to go off-roading. But under this law and under this legislation, it would not qualify as a high clearance vehicle. I don't think.
Yeah, and it's not, I mean, that statement that we just read in the letter, it doesn't say in inches what high clearance is, right? But so it's up to the ranger and or to interpret the law, right? And to make decisions based on these warnings and fines.
And the line has become so blurred because there are a lot of people who are lifting Subarus and Bronco Sports and making them high clearance vehicles, even though they don't necessarily have the low range to go up and over things. And let's talk about what we consider to be serious off-roaders versus kind of these soft roaders. So what would you put in the category of a serious off-roader that a ranger might decide is somebody who's worth going on some of these harder trails?
And let's not talk about side-by-sides. I mean, that's a whole nother category, right?
Good point.
Because it could be a side-by-side, it could be a dirt bike. So we're going to leave that on the side. We're talking about road legal vehicles that you can drive on the highway. We have the ORI index as well, right? Off-road index that we've been using in some of our reviews. And I think, first of all, ground clearance over 9 inches. That would be my personal kind of measure, because as soon as you start talking about something that's higher than 9 inches off the ground, you're getting into that territory of Wranglers, Broncos, 4Runners. These are serious vehicles. Also approach and departure angles, right? So are you going to hit your nose when you're approaching that big rock or obstacle and the damage either the body work on your vehicle and maybe disable it, right?
Yeah, and then let's keep going with kind of what we used for our TFL off-road index. So some of the other criteria, of course, is does it have enough suspension travel? Because when you're going over rocks, you don't want to have wheels floating in the air because that's when you lose traction. Does it have underbody cladding, which protects important things like the transmission and the gas tank? Does it have
the right tires,
a spare tire?
Yeah,
so
that matches the off-road tire, right?
Yeah. So it's not just a
little donut
or a donut.
Yeah.
It's actually, once again, the thing you would see on a Wrangler. And then I would say, in general, most four-wheel drive pickups, especially any four-wheel drive pickup that's kind of off-roady, and I'm talking about, the Tremor, the FX4. If you're in Ford territory, of course, the Raptor. If you're in Ram, it would be the Rebel. If you're a GM, then it would be
anything from Z71 to ZR2 and Trail Boss.
Pro 4X.
Yeah,
in the Nissan world,
Tier de Pros.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it doesn't have to be definitely a size thing. It could be a mid-size. It could be a full size. It could be a heavy duty. It could be a compact truck. Even though there is a Tremor version of the Maverick. So, would those qualify? I think most of those would qualify as high clearance off-roaders.
Yeah, but except the Maverick, maybe. Right, the Maverick, once again, you have to look vehicle by vehicle, right?
CVT, no transfer case.
CVT, really bad departure angle because the Maverick has this kind of large bed for its size sticking out the back, right? So all those things we would rate on our index, including locking differentials, right? So even though the Maverick Tremor has a clutch-based locking differential in the back, which is actually really good, you have to kind of judge it as a whole, right? Does it have enough clearance? How are the angles? Does it have a front locker or not, right? That's kind of how we get to the top-notch off-roader.
Now, the other one that doesn't really work well off-road is the competitor to that. That's the Santa Cruz, and we've tested that up Tombstone Hill. And what we found is if you have a vehicle with, let's say, a dual-clutch transmission, and now we're getting really into the weeds because the Rangers aren't going to probably look for the type of transmission.
Right.
But a dual-clutch is designed to quickly change gears, which is not grand for off-roading. And we have had a lot of these soft-roaders overheat their transmission because it's trying to figure out what wheel has traction, so it's braking one wheel, sending torque to the other wheel, and then it doesn't take long for the system just to kind of throw its hands up and say, this is overheating me, knock it off.
And also moving slowly without low range can overheat things as well, right? Because, like you said, you're using brakes too much, you're trying to send power at the same time.
And then the question then becomes, what about like the Renegade that we have in our office, right? Which is
a Trail Hawk.
It's a Trail Hawk. It's trail rated, but it doesn't have a low range.
And it doesn't have good clearance.
This is just going to be, I don't know what the Park Service is going to do with all this, but it's not going to be an easy thing. I kind of feel like, if you show up with a lifted pickup truck or a lifted Wrangler or a Bronco, you're good to go. But if you show up with this Mazda or maybe a Subaru, even the Timberline, they may kind of look at you and say, we're not sure about this. And I think it's going to be up to the discretion of the individual ranger that sees you.
And I think you're right, Roman. It's really about safety, right? And common sense. I mean, if you have a bald tire, don't try to go up slick rock, right? If you don't have enough clearance, don't do it. If you don't have, really steel bumpers and, ability to kind of bounce off a couple of obstacles, don't do it.
And in some ways, the whole thing is very silly. I was just on Kingston Peak with one of my friends who's part of the Colorado Off-Road Recovery team, and he was telling me that there was a guy who was on the Switzerland Trail who kind of drove into a puddle in a Jeep Wrangler and got stuck. And I'm like, how do you get stuck? It was snowy, so it was a little slick. So snow was melting. There was a puddle. Switzerland Trail is probably one of the easiest trails near to us as possible. There's no real steepness to it. There's no real obstacles to it. And he asked the guy, do you have it in low range? And the guy said, oh, yeah, I have it in low range. And it was a guy who came up here, rented the Jeep, and he gets in the car, and he noticed
was it two-wheel drive?
It was not. No, it was in four-wheel drive, but not in low range.
Okay.
So he put it in low range and just drove out of the puddle, no problem. And that goes, I think, to the example that it's not just the vehicle; it's the driver at the end of the day. So there are people who can probably wheel a two-wheel drive. I don't know. Pick the vehicle of your choice.
A pickup truck two-wheel drive.
Yeah, much better than they can. A lifted four-wheel drive with big, massive tires, where someone is behind the wheel who has no experience and doesn't know how to pick lines. And this, like anything, there's a lot to wheeling, especially when you're doing something very technical, which is what Moab is all about.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then finally, we had an interesting experience recently, and this is something that I wanted to share with you guys. That is, we were going up Kingston Peak here in Colorado, and you want to tell them what happened, Andre?
Yeah. So I am in the Ranger Raptor. You're behind me in the Bronco Everglades. So our vehicles are really, beefy. And I'm driving, and I can see a vehicle in front of me in the trees, and we pull up on it, and it's a Subaru Solterra,
which is
all-wheel drive.
The new electric Subaru.
Yes. And this has street tires.
But X mode.
It does have all-wheel drive, but it's got street tires. It's basically a stock vehicle, right? The one you would buy at a dealership. And there's a very nice lady driving it, and she pulled off immediately when she saw me kind of approaching from the back. She pulled over and she needed directions. She was looking for a lake.
Yeah, and she wanted to go up this trail, and I had just been up it the day before, and she was like, "You think I can make it?" And I kind of looked at her and I said, "You don't want to be like,
crushing her
dreams." Yeah. But the reason I bring this up is simply because there are a lot of electric vehicles that are incredibly capable off-road. A Hummer EV,
a Rivian truck or SUV,
the Cybertruck, and they don't have a low range. In fact, they only have one gear. And so
but they have multiple motors, right?
Yeah. If you're kind of using the standard that I kind of threw out at the beginning of this video, which is, does it have a low range? Then that all goes out the window with a lot of the new electric vehicles. So I don't know if there's a good answer to this.
But that Solterra didn't have really high clearance. It didn't have the proper tires and really bad approach departure angles, right? So it could handle a dirt road, which the lady was driving. But when you start climbing sharp rocks, I don't think it'll handle that.
Yeah, no. But I think she was smart enough to know when things got too tough. But sometimes, when you're young and eager to try out your new Timberline or whatever off-road version you have of a soft-roader, those rules don't apply necessarily. Anyway, I think these guys have opened up just a can of worms, and I don't know if there is an answer, except for, doing more recoveries.
Well, you could always look at the specs, right? Because nobody's going to be there with a ruler underneath your Solterra measuring it, but you could just, I guess, look up a spec table, and I guess you can go by that, but
I've just seen a lot of signs where it says high clearance off-road vehicles only. I've seen that on a lot of government signs.
And I think you should heed that sign.
Yeah.
I mean, that sign is there for a reason.
Yeah, that's your big warning red light. You should know what you're doing. And the problem, of course, is that when you get into a lot of these places, there's no cell service. And then you're going to either have to self-rescue or walk out if you do get yourself stuck. And so it's always good, like we do, try to go with a buddy. We carry a satellite phone if you have like the new Starlink Mini, but just something that doesn't force you to either freeze to death in the winter or get dehydrated in the summer in places like Moab. So think of a backup plan, no matter how good your vehicle is. Anyway, I think we've talked enough about this. Let us know in the comments below what you think would be or should be the criteria for allowing people on relatively difficult trails. And is this something that the government should be mandating, or is it something that the government should just stay out of? And
the fines look really high.
They look incredibly high.
Yeah.
And maybe let people figure it out on their own.
There you go.
See you next time. Ciao.